Welcome to the introduction of your first pesticide safety course. As a pest management professional, you have an obligation to follow all pesticide label directions and provide service in a way that is safe to all people, pets, and the environment as well as yourself.
Take a look at what this initial course objectives are.
Understand the terms toxicity and hazard in regards to pesticide applications.
Know the common pesticide entry, exposure routes.
Know the precautions necessary to guard against injury to applicators and other individuals in or near the treatment areas.
Know the protective clothing and equipment for the products you are applying. PPE.
Know the symptoms of pesticide poisoning.
Know the procedures involved in the event of a pesticide spill.
As a pest control professional, you must be familiar with mixing and applying the chemical products you will use in your work. Knowing the properties of each product, particularly how it can affect your health and that of others, is critical. Here, we will discuss a product's toxicity and how it is measured.
The toxicity of products is measured by the LD50 method. LD50 stands for lethal dose, 50%, and is a measure of the toxicity of a substance, indicating the dose that is expected to kill 50% of a population of test animals.
The toxicity of a product is important, especially when you are handling, mixing, or applying it.
Hazard is the degree of danger involved in exposure to the pesticide used. Most pesticides are in a diluted form, requiring that the product be mixed to a final form which dilutes the chemical to a lesser toxicity and hazard. A general rule of thumb to keep in mind is that the hazard is a function of toxicity and exposure. Remember this formula: hazard equals toxicity multiplied by exposure. It is common sense that the degree of hazard is determined by the duration or amount of exposure to a toxic. There are two basic types of action recognized for most pesticides. The first is acute toxicity. The second is chronic toxicity. So let's take a look at how these differ.
Acute toxicity is a rapid response, often within minutes or hours of a single exposure or dose of chemical.
Chronic toxicity is repeated exposure over time to sublethal doses of some chemicals. Levels of some pesticides can build up inside the body after repeated exposure. Fortunately, the registration process required by all pesticides by EPA considers the potential for acute and chronic problems. As a result, most materials are formulated, and the directions are carefully written to limit the possibility of toxicity problems.
Safe use of these chemicals requires an understanding of the basic toxic properties of each material used, following all label directions for property application, and using appropriate safety equipment. Regardless of the toxicity of the pesticides, minimizing exposure to any chemical used each and every time it is applied is a good practice. It is essential to understand that minimizing exposure is the basic standard of pesticide safety.
That is correct, because a continuing concern in the pest control industry is accidental poisoning that may result from the various chemicals used to manage insects and rodents.
In our industry, you will work around chemicals as a professional. Most of the chemicals are toxic to people and animals in varying degrees, depending on the animal, type of chemical involved, the way the chemical enters the body, and other important factors.
Always check the pesticide label for each product before mixing and applying. The label will advise what personal protection equipment and clothing you are required to mix and apply the specific product to reduce exposure. The label will also provide other essential information necessary and required that is designed for safe mixing and applying. Remember, you are responsible for your own health as well as others.
Your body can be exposed to toxic products in 4 different ways. It is important that you understand the routes of toxic entries. Remember, long-term exposure is not like acute poisoning. It is a gradual buildup in the body that can have adverse effects on you.
The first point of entry of toxic products is inhalation. Mixing and applying pesticides creates a risk when breathing in the vapors or mists of certain products. The label will instruct you on the personal protective equipment you are required to wear and when it is required.
The second is ingestion, which is much more common than you might think. When you handle toxic products and fail to wear protective gear or wash your hands, you can easily transfer the toxic product onto your food, cigarettes, or even your fingernails. Remember, the hazard is a buildup over time that can be devastating.
Dermal exposure is the third point of exposure, and the rate of exposure per area of the body might surprise you. One would think the hands or forearms are the highest rated areas for exposure. Shockingly, it is not. The scrotum is by far the highest absorption area for pesticides. The forehead comes in as the second. Remember this while mixing and applying these products or after working with them, as you wipe your face, rub your eyes, or use the bathroom. Be aware of what you are currently using or have used before.
Injection and penetration have recently been added as the fourth route of entry for chemical exposure. Normally, when you think of chemical exposure via penetration or injection, you envision using a needle to inject chemicals into your body. A simple cut or scratch on the skin provides access to your system if chemicals are allowed to enter through an open wound.
That is correct. Normally, we think of drugs injected into the body with a needle. However, toxic chemicals can enter the body through any break in the skin. That is why it is necessary to use caution and be aware of any breaks in the skin where chemicals may come into contact with them.
As a professional pest control applicator, you must know how to protect yourself while mixing and applying your products. Knowing how chronic and acute exposures happen will help keep you safe in your profession. Some of the common ways you may be exposed through absorption, dermal, are a lack of protective clothing, or using contaminated clothing, such as pants, gloves, or shoes that have been exposed to chemicals and not cleaned properly. So, here are some ways to avoid this type of exposure. Always use protective clothing. After use, always wash the clothing, gloves, and clean the shoes. Keep all your safety equipment clean and in good working order. Wash your hands before using the bathroom as well as after. Inhalation exposure often occurs due to improper use of a respirator or failing to use one altogether. Even if you wear the appropriate respirator, an incorrect fit can also lead to exposure. Additionally, an old or poorly maintained respirator contributes to the risk of inhalation exposure. Use the proper equipment, make sure it is a correct fit. If it is old and in poor condition, get a new one. Your health depends on it. Now let's take a look at ingestion, or oral exposure. This occurs when eating or smoking with contaminated hands. It can also happen by simply storing your lunch, snacks, or beverages near pesticides or in areas where you are applying them. You would think this is a factor of common sense. However, these mistakes occur and are quite preventable. A pesticide is any chemical that kills bugs. Pesticide poisoning occurs when someone swallows or breathes in an insecticide, or it is absorbed through the skin. Part of your training as a pest control professional is the Pesticide Emergency Response Plan. In other courses, you will train on and cover chemical spills, as well as chemical control and prevention. In this section, we will discuss pesticide exposure and what to do if you or someone nearby has been exposed to pesticides. This article is for educational purposes. Do not use it to treat or manage an actual serious poison exposure. If you or someone you are with has a serious exposure, call your local emergency number, such as 911, or your local poison control center can be reached directly by calling the National Toll-Free Poison Help Hotline 1-800-222-1222 from anywhere in the United States. A couple of important facts to know when you are dealing with a pesticide emergency. The best first aid in pesticide emergencies is to stop the source of the pesticide exposure. First aid is the initial effort to assist a victim while medical help is on the way. You can administer artificial respiration if the victim is not breathing. However, you must ensure that you do not expose yourself while trying to help. To start with, drench the skin and clothing with plenty of water. Ensure you wear personal protective equipment to safeguard yourself. Then, remove the victim's protective gear and cleanse the skin with a gentle liquid detergent. If a shower is available or feasible, this is the most effective method. Dry the victim and wrap them in a warm blanket. If the skin is burned or otherwise injured, cover that area immediately with a loose, clean, dry, soft, cloth, or bandage. Do not apply ointments, greases, powders, or other drugs in first aid treatment of burns or injured skin. Pesticide exposure through the eyes is more common than you might think. Splashback is a frequent issue, and touching or rubbing your eyes with contaminated hands happens all too often. Not only can pesticides enter the bloodstream through the eyes, but the chemicals can also cause significant damage or severely burn the eyes. When you encounter eye contamination or exposure, the best course of action with pesticides in the eyes is to flush and wash the eye quickly, but gently. If available, use an eye wash dispenser. Otherwise, hold the eyelid open and wash with a gentle drip of clean running water positioned so that it flows across the eye rather than directly into the eye. Then, rinse the eye for 15 minutes or more. Do not use chemicals or drugs in the rinse water. Not only are you dealing with chemical exposure, but also eye damage, so use caution. Pesticide introduction through the mouth or swallowed can be both chronic and acute, particularly if proper protective equipment is not worn, as we discussed earlier. If you suspect the incident is life-threatening, call 911. If you or someone else states they have swallowed or had pesticide enter their mouth, begin rinsing thoroughly with plenty of water immediately. If necessary, call 911 and the Poison Control Center again. Do not induce vomiting unless you receive instructions from the Poison Control Center or a qualified medical expert familiar with the incident. The pest control technician. It must always be remembered that the pest control industry does not sell pesticides to its clients. It sells expertise. Expertise involves not only controlling pests, but also doing so safely for people, companion animals, wildlife, and the environment. It is the technician who performs the actual tasks required to achieve control of urban pests. It is the technician who hand delivers this expertise to the client's doorstep. Thus, to the public, the technician is the industry. This concludes this section on pesticide safety. Other courses are required to complete the new hire training, and all will involve some type of pesticide safety. It is your responsibility as a pest control professional to protect your clients, yourself, and the environment. Remember that professionals never stop training and that you are the face of the industry.